So let's record this joke again. Serious joke. So the Cold War statement on peace was this way. Will there be a third world war? No, there will be peace, that not a stone will be left upon another. So that's the kind of world we lived in. And that's what I would like you, as you will listen to my presentation, start to reflect your own understanding on war. How do you understand a war yourself? Because I will slightly touch on it from a political and from a theological point of view. So these are the three statements that I will be mainly reflecting along with you. There is this well-known statement of Jesus that you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. That it's a good question. How do we understand this statement, or how should we translate this statement? I will talk about it later. Blessed are the peacemakers. And then there is a third statement, which Jesus says that you are blessed because you are a peacemaker, but I did not bring peace. I brought a sword to this world. So how do we get these three statements together as something complementary rather than a controversial? So that's the thing I will talk with you. Before each statement, I will share with you quotations from different books that I have read on war, on peacemaking, on understanding these three Jesus statements. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the writer Henry Nouwen. He used to be a classic while he was still alive. And he has a very interesting book on peacemaking. So in that book, he states, each new generation passes its conflicts to the next one, arming it with the increasingly terrifying instruments of human malice. So basically, we can see that conflicts, wars are something that we will experience all the way, or as long as we live. It's interesting that the first statement that Jesus does on the war, it is a part of so-called eschatological discourse. It is a part of, I follow here, I had to say that in the beginning, I follow here a Matthean story, a gospel story. So all these three statements are part of his teaching blocks, because if you see, or one way of reading the Matthew story is to see it as a juxtaposition of teaching blocks and narrative blocks. So he would teach, and then he would narrate about what Jesus did, what Jesus said, and what Jesus did. So that's one way of seeing the Matthean story. So the statement of war which Jesus made is, we find it in eschatological discourse in the chapter 24. So we have to slightly understand what the eschaton, or what the eschatology is all about. Some people think that eschatology is on the last time. So and our aim is to figure out when this last time will come, and how we should prepare ourselves for it, and so on and so forth. I personally believe that eschatons began with Jesus's first coming, and it will end with his second coming. So this whole period in between, that's the eschaton. So the time in which the church lives, in which the church does its mission, it's eschaton. That's the time in which we live between these two comings of Christ. So we do not choose the time in which we live. We live and die in the time that we came to this world. So when Jesus make this statement that there will be wars and rumors of wars, he basically make a war as one of the markers of the eschaton. So war actually will be a marker that reminds us that we are living in between times, that we are living in eschaton. And how should we take this phrase, Jesus's phrase or Jesus's statement? Matt did not mention, and I didn't say that to him, but I wrote a commentary on Matthew's gospel, so I had to study a bit the text and the context and the pretext and everything that has to do with the Matthew story or Matthean gospel. So basically, how we are to understand this phrase is that we will not hear about wars and rumors of wars, but it is more correct to translate this statement as we will hear about wars that are far from us and wars that are near to us, or wars that happens with us or through us. And here I'm always a kind of as you see on my slide, there is a double astonishment. What I'm astonished is that sometimes Christians are astonished why there are so many wars on earth. Why all these conflicts are taking place constantly somewhere. So I always wonder whether we take Jesus's words seriously. If he said that there will be wars, well, there should be wars. He was right by saying that. So, yes, I'm astounded that Christians are astounded by that fact. But on the other hand, how we should not be astounded by this fact if war is something that goes directly against the nature of our mission. We are to, transfer our societies. We are to create a flourishing societies, because war is exactly the opposite or antonym of flourishing society. It is about destruction, it is about tragedies, it is about killing, it is about death, it is about violence, and so on and so forth. So by double astonishment, I mean that on the one side, we are to trust Jesus's words, but on the other side, these things that he predicts as a war contradicts to what we are called to be and to do in this world. So we find ourselves in this kind of contradictory state. And now I have two questions for you to reflect as I will talk. Can you recall a day in your life when there was no war? I mean, somewhere, war in the news. I lived 52 years. I was trying to recall a day in my life since I can remember my life, and I could not recall a day that there will be no wars somewhere. So again, Jesus is right by saying that there will be wars, and there are wars. I don't want to bomb you with the statistics, but there is the statistics that there are not only constant wars, but there is this increasement of wars. So as we are approaching the end of times, there is this intensification of conflicts around the world. The second question I would like you to reflect is, can you recall the name of any aggressor who would call himself an aggressor and who would call a war instead of special operation or in any words, who would call a war a murderous thing than rather something liberating or something salvific, or something even sacred. If you study the history of wars, every aggressor never would call himself aggressor. He would not announce that he is going to kill people, that he is going to create destruction, that he is going to spread a tragedy. No, he would say that he is about launching a liberation operation. He is about freeing people from something. He is about rescuing the world from something, and so on and so forth. So the two things we have to understand about three things we have to understand about eschaton. The war will be there. It will be a constant something. And whoever launch wars will never call it that way. And that's all things that Jesus has warned us in the part on eschatology. So now let's go more into the understanding of the nature of war from a political perspective first, and then I will talk about theological perspective. From a political perspective, war is seen as a continuation of policy by other means, as simple as that. So the waging war is doing politics in another possible way. So that's how the politicians would understand the war. And it helps us, when we know how the politicians understand the war, it helps us to understand why we have so many wars across the world. When economic or political diplomatic pressure are deemed ineffective by one side, they may resort to armed force to persuade the other side. When arguments fail to convince, the argument of force is applied. Diplomats no longer talk at round tables. Instead, military personnel engage in discussions on the battlefield. So that's how we should understand the war from a political point of view. There is a classical work on war, which was written by Karl Philipp von Clausewitz, von Kriege in German, which is about war. So he gives this definition to war. He says that the war is an act of force that compels the enemy to obey our will. So this is just to confirm what I've said to you, that war is doing politics by other means. So if we cannot compel you to do what we want by peaceful means, we will retreat to the forceful means, but we will compel you to do what we want. From theological perspective, war is viewed as an attempt by humans to assume or attribute divine authorities to themselves. It is seen a war as a fate of those who have not submitted themselves to God and mistakenly believe that their mission is to subjugate others. Because they have not submitted their will to the Almighty, mighty thinks that their mission in this world is to submit others to themselves. If you want to follow this notion on theological understanding of war, you should read John Locke on the state of war. He has this also classical work on war. War is both an attempt and a means for the stronger to dominate the weaker and compel them to live according to the will and desires of the conqueror. That's why we have this statement that, no one judge conqueror, because the conqueror is the one who writes the history of war. So their perception of war is the perception of war. Unfortunately, no one is interested in the side of the weak. From theological perspective, earthly rulers with imperial ambitions make two erroneous assumptions. First, they tend to believe that they are the history makers, that they are the ones who are to direct the course of the historical developments. And if you read the Daniel, prophet Daniel, the book of the prophet Daniel, that's exactly what the prophet Daniel subverts. He says that that's what the big empires think they are called to do, but that's not truth. God is the history maker. He is the one who directs the developments of the history, not the imperial rulers or pharaohs or kings or whatever. So that's the first thing they are mistaking in. The second thing is that they are trying to alter the course of historical developments by force. They believe that they are embodying not their own will or desires or ambition, but the will of God's or the Almighty One. The rulers of the world consider their mission not to serve or protect the weaker, but to subjugate, exploit, and compel the weaker to serve them for their own enrichment and dominance. So we have these mistaken. First, they think they are the makers. The second thing, they think that when they make this course of the history, they are not fulfilling their own will or ambitions, but they're rather fulfilling the will and the ambitions of the Almighty One. And few quotations again to kind of root these statements. There is a document, Glossa Ordinaria, a well-known document, and it states the following. As long as the world exists, angels will rule over angels, men over men, demons over demons. But when all are gathered together, then all the rulership will be abolished. If you study the history of war, we will conclude soon with this dark talk about war. We will go to peace, to the more bright and optimistic notion, but let me stay with you for a bit longer on war so that we would have a perception what it is. So I will just here delineate some of the statements that the people come up with who studied the history of war. So until there are nations, territories, and politics, there will be wars. So we have to just be prepared for that. A war plan exists only until the first shot is fired. So that's what you have to know, that there, when Putin says that everything goes according to the plan, but no one knows this plan, and we suspect that he doesn't know it either. Because there is only a war plan until the first shot is fired. After that, there is no war plan. And that's why no one knows when this war will end, how it will end, and will it end at some point. The second thing I learned while I lived in the Balkans is that first victim of the war is truth. So the first thing that dies in any launched war is a truth. Since then, the propaganda begins. Propaganda on each side. And that's why we are so bombed by all kinds of propaganda, and we have to really have a critical thinking to figure out where the truth or where the right side is in any war situation, and I've learned that over the years. Third statement about the war, actually the fourth one. The study of the history of wars has shown that wars, from a political standpoint, are the costliest and least effective means of persuasion or conflict resolution. So all those who have studied the wars, they have realized that it costs the fortune and it solves nothing. So we wonder after that statement why we would retreat to the wars when we have such an understanding of the war, that it costs a lot and it is not effective at all. I even frightened to imagine how much we have spent already on this war so far. And if we could invest all those monies in the human developments, in fighting the poverty, in providing the education, providing the medical care to the people, we would transform this world. We would make this world a slight anticipation of paradise. Yet we prefer to spend all this money not on building, developing, but distracting, destroying, killing, and making tragedy even more. War as a means of persuasion through force not only fails to resolve conflict, but deepens them, postponing their potential resolution by many years or even decades. So it costs us a lot. It doesn't help us at all. It doesn't solve the conflicts, but deepens them. And its resolution, it postpones its resolutions. So why do we wage wars? That's the question I want us to ponder about. Next statement. War do not resolve conflict, they merely end them through exhaustions of resources with solutions that satisfies neither side. So war do not resolve conflicts. They end whenever one side is exhausted of resources or both sides exhausted of resources, and it brings the solution at the end that satisfies neither side. The negative experience of war as a means of problem solving or advancing interest underscores the failure of policies that cannot create or solve issues. So that's what we have to understand about wars. There was the Russians like to say that he was a Russian philosopher. We like to say that he was a Ukrainian philosopher because he was born in Ukraine. Nikolai Berdyaev, and he lived all his life abroad. He used to say like this: when we ask God why there are wars, you know how God answers us? He asks us the same questions. He responds to us with the same question. He says, why do you have so many wars? And two more quotations just to affirm this, what I've shared with you. Wars are always sacred to those who have to fight them. If those who ignite wars did not declare them sacred, what a fool would go to fight. So that's what I said, that the politicians are not just think that they are, that they are creating the course of the history, but they think that they are in this way fulfilling the will of God's or God himself. Another statement: the great spiritual tragedy is that many cruel, inhuman acts are committed in the name of serving to God. I don't know whether you follow what Putin says. We do follow in Ukraine because we are interested in what he is trying to say about this war, and adding to denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine. He not long ago said that it is also about satanization of Ukraine. So he would call us Ukrainians as a satanic nation, and his mission of this war is to desatanize us. Recently, he says that Russia is the only country in the whole world that is directly ruled by God himself. So how can you, how can't you, can't argue that kind of statements, This is just a madness. But that's how the politicians would view the war. And we, as a Christians, we have to have this theological understanding of the war and how erroneous these politicians are when they are trying to ascribe to themselves, more than they have in reality. Okay, let's pause for a moment with war. Let's go to peace. Peace is much interesting thing than the war. So the second statement that Jesus made is, he says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. So now, having an understanding that we are living in the time of eschaton, in between his comings, and that having the understanding that there will be continuous wars, how should we understand this second statement of Jesus, that blessed are the peacemakers? because they will be called the sons of God. So, do we understand now at this point that there is a big need in the peacemakers when there is everything fine or when there are wars, when there are conflicts? When do we badly need these peacemakers? So now we understand that when Jesus said, "But the blessed are the peacemakers," he means that though we are called to be a peacemakers, not in the times of the absence of war only, but more so in the times of war, because there will be wars between these times. How should we understand these beatitudes or Macarism? At the moment, we are working on putting a book together, and I'm a part of that project as well. And we are trying to revisit and rethink the Matthean Beatitudes and how the war situation shape our perception of it. And I was so brave that I decided to write, because we have 9 authors, and each author is exploring one of the Beatitudes. So I was either brave enough or stupid enough to choose to write on "Blessed are the pure hearts, for they will see God." So I'm trying to, actually, I already finished it, my part to write my part in this book. So I'm trying to argue how we are to see God in the midst of tragedy, in the midst of war tragedy, in the midst of human suffering. Who are these people of pure heart? How we are to understand these beatitudes? But now we will talk about "Blessed are the peacemakers." Blessed are those who bring peace in the midst of war. How should we understand the peacemaking in a biblical way, or in a biblical perception? And what does it mean for the church to be a peacemaking in the times of eschaton? Because it seems to be that, well, at least my reading of the Beatitudes, that they are the identity markers. They are identify those who dare to affiliate themselves with Christ in the world of wars. So let's try to a bit explore how we are to understand the peace in a Jesus' teaching, and I believe Jesus stands in a prophetic tradition. But introductory quotes into these reflections. It was, by the way, I would highly recommend you to read this book by Jonathan Sachs, Not in a God's Name. How it is about how many violence is committed in God's name, and how should we not ascribe it to God. So he says that weapons win wars, but to win peace, ideas are needed. So that's exactly what I mean, that those who wage wars in this time, they are lacking the creative ways of solving problems other way but by force. When we say that we live in the times of wars, we should understand that the world recognizes the path of war as the only way to achieve peace, albeit temporary. The principle that the world adheres is a very simple. If you want peace, prepare for war. That's every politician, every strong country will tell you that if you want a peace, you should be ready for war. So the question that I would like you to ponder upon, is there any other way to achieve peace rather than war? A series of biblical texts warns us that there will be much talk of peace in the world, but there will be no actual peace. So in the prophets we read, peace, peace, when there is no peace. So we live in a world where there is so much talk on peace, but somehow we do not experience peace. The Apostle Paul, in one of his eschatological passages, also warns us that in the end of times, I mean, in the times of eschaton, as we already agreed on, those who truly seek not peace but dominion will speak of peace and security. So actually, the scripture warns us that those who will wage war, they will talk about peace and security. They are accustomed to achieving temporary peace not through justice, but through war. So there will be a lot of talks on peace. But how we are to understand a peace and a peacemaking? Prophets and Jesus challenge the principle that war is the only way to achieve peace. So I believe that Jesus was standing in the prophetic tradition, and he would disagree with that way of thinking as the only possible way to peace. They propose an alternative path. Genuine and lasting peace can be achieved through justice, social justice. Peace is much more than the absence of war. It is a harmony in human relations, overcoming division and alienations, which becomes possible with the presence and availability of justice to all the people. That's how the prophets, that's how the Jesus would view the peace. Their principle of peace differed from the world's principle of peace. If for the world war is the only way to peace, then for the prophets and Jesus, the principle of peace looks like this or sounds like this. If you want peace, advocate for justice, act justly, care for the vulnerable, seek not dominion over the weak, but to serve to them. That's how the peace looks like from the Jesus's point of view. Another quotation from Eric Fromm. He says that the idea of peace cannot be separated from the idea of humanness in a humanity. So if we want to be a human being in a full sense, then we are the people who will long for peace, do everything for peace to be a reality. Peacemaking is not about avoiding conflicts at any cost, nor it is about resolving conflict through the compromise that satisfies all parties. You know this nice idea of win-win situation, resolving conflict by win-win situation. Well, in our situation, how can we find this win-win solution in a situation of war with Russia? Peacemaking involves standing up for values and justice as a fundamental principle rather than seeking win-win solution in the context of social relations. War, especially those of aggressions, are the manifestation of embodiment of blatant injustice. So what we are to do to be called as a peacemaker in the times of war? What we should offer to the world as alternative way of achieving peace rather than by war. So we come to the third part of my statement, and it is on sword. But prior to that, another quotation from Jonathan Sacks. Peace leads to profound crisis of identity. The boundaries between self and other, friends and foe, must be reconsidered. So here we come to the most interesting statement that Jesus made in the Gospel of Matthew. Because, we can find a way to put these two previous statements together. So there will be wars, but we are called to peace. So we are to be peacemakers in the times of war. So that's simple. But then he says, by sending his disciples to the world for mission. You remember his statement, he says, I send you as sheep among wolves. I would like you just to, for a second, to ponder this image in your mind. How does the sheep feels among the wolves? Does it feel comfortable? Does it feel strong? Does it feel victorious? Does it thinks, I know how to fight the wolves and I will overcome them? How the sheep feels in the wolf's surrounding. And why would Jesus use this imagery? What he would like to communicate to us theologically on these issues. Can the sheep survive in the wolf's surrounding? And if it can, how? These are the questions I would like to discuss with you and see how. What do you think about it? But let's go back to the sword, because that's what he says. There will be wars. Blessed are the peacemakers, but I did not bring the peace, but the sword. The sword in Matthew is not about war or violence, but about, because many times theologians would say that the sword is a symbol of power, strength, violence. It is not about that. It is about the wisdom to shape difference or alternative vision and the courage to defend it not with force, but with convictions. The sword divides along the ideological and values lines. It separates the understanding of peace between the world, that is how the world understands the peace, and the way to peace by war, and the church's understanding of peace, as well as possible path to achieving it in the world. Peace in a worldly sense is upheld and defended through the strength or violence. If you want peace, prepare for war. We have heard this several times already. Is there another way to achieve peace, not by force and violence? Peace in the church's understanding is upheld through convictions and is not possible without justice. Both types of peace comes at a very high cost. The first is achieved with the physical sword through destruction, violence, and death. The second type of peace is achieved through justice and service, guided by convictions and values. I would like you also to reflect for a moment on was Jesus a peacemaker? We don't have a time, but I could lead you through the whole Matthew Gospel just to show you how his birth narratives creates a conflict and how that conflict goes throughout the Gospel, and it ends with him conflicting with the high priest and so on and so forth. We would like to see Jesus as a peacemaker and preach him as a peacemaker. This is even possible for us in relatively peaceful times. He was a peacemaker, but not in a sense of how we understand or how the world understands peace. He was a peacemaker in a biblical, prophetic sense. He was the one who was standing for convictions, for principle. He was the one who was standing for justice. And he, unlike the Pilate, unlike the Barnabas, he see that there is another way to peace apart from the violence, revolution, uprising, and other possible ways. In the gospel, Jesus teaches that peace cannot exist without justice. He emphasizes that where there is no justice, there cannot be peace. His teaching underscores the idea that advocating for justice is not an unjust world can indeed lead to conflict. So whenever you are standing for justice in unjust world, basically you are provoking a conflict. Another good quotation, just for you to ponder on. It comes from Henri Mariel de Lubac, the French theologian. He says, the church exists in the world, and by this fact alone, it introduced it to a state of unrest. As a constant witness of Christ, who came into the world to shake the foundations of human life, it emerges in the world as a powerful catalyst of contradictions. So what Jesus meant by this word is not that he was talking about violence, because many Christians, unfortunately, in Ukraine, they refer to that passage as they said, well, but you see, he is talking about peace, but when there is a different context, we can take a sword and fight. That's not what Jesus meant. Jesus was saying that he brought a sword, a dividing sword, between the world's vision of peace and his disciples' visions of peace. We are to be a community of alternative. We are to be a community of contrast in the world that offers, I think, a wrong perception of peace. So the sword is about identity. He came to divide us from the world, not taking us from the world, but leaving us in the world, making us different from the world. So here we come to the identity issues. The question of identity is a conflicting question, because it is the question about similarity or sameness and difference or otherness. Differentiation, that's what creates identity. I don't know, have you read a book by Miroslav Volf, a very good friend of mine, Exclusion and Embrace. It's a book that is listed as one of the hundreds most important books of the 20th century. And he wrote it as a part of our lectures in the Balkans when we were students, his theology students. And that's how he says that differentiation creates identity. Without differentiation, there is no identity. What kind of differentiation? The desire and the right to be oneself at the personal, collective, community, or national level is inherently a conflicting issue. Even try to be yourself in the church setting, it will create a conflict, because everyone wants that God would look like him, not he would look like God. Conflict of loyalties. Whom or what do we remain loyal to in the times or in the context of conflict? To ourselves, to the people, to state, to God? So that's a big challenge for us, because the identity issues is calling us to be similar to Christ in the world and to differ from the world. We can mix it up and we can preach Christ being different from Christ and preach against the world being similar to the world. Identity formation is a constant process. Identity formation involves the simultaneous process of forming similarities and differences. That's what Miroslav Volf means by differentiation. Through forming similarities, with whom, with what? We should ask ourselves the question. We identify differences from whom, from what? And through forming differences, national, religious, we identify similarities. And that's a kind of constant process that we are involved in. In conclusion, my friends, I know that I was too complicated. I hope I was not too complicated for you. We will make a conclusive statements. What do we mean by war? What do we mean by peacemaking? And what do we mean by sword? War is what destroys the world and the humanity in humans, as they were intended and created by God. The result of wars is always death and distractions. So there is nothing good in a war at all. Peacemaking is what restores the world, the humanity according to God's desire, design, and vision. The result of peacemaking is a wholesome flourishing of human life, and that is what we are to strive for in the midst of conflicts and wars, as people called by Christ. What is sword? Sword is what draws a clear value-based division between these diametrically opposite views of the world and humanity. As James says, for the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. And a bit of more. The world has achieved peace through war in pursuit of security. Jesus proposed achieving peace through justice as a fundamental values. Church calling in the times of war. In the worlds of war, Christ's disciples are called to be peacemakers who offer a different vision from the world of wars. This vision most likely will conflict with the world's prevailing views. This is where our distinction from the world lies, and our identity, but also with the principle of his kingdom. So, my friends, we are called to a big mission to live among the world war situation, but proposing the world alternative vision. And final quote: Apocalypse occurs when prophecy loses hope and politics loses patience. I hope we do not lose hope in Christ and in his transformative message of peace. And I hope that even in the midst of war, we can be, as a church, a place of hope where people can come and where they can restore their humanity and where they can find themselves as at home. And that's what we are trying to do as a church in Bucha. Thank you so much. I finish with my presentation, and I'm looking forward to hear your comments, your disagreements, your alternative proposals. I have to admit that when you live in a war situation, your picture can be distorted because that's the all things you see around yourselves are distractions, and this picture can be distortive. So I would like to hear your questions, your comments, your disagreements, so that my picture would be straightened up as well. Thank you very much for being very attentive listeners. See you. Yes, I can see you.
About the what your stance would be with Ukrainian Christians. Russia invades Ukraine, and what would you see as a Christian response? To go to war and fight back against the Russians? Is that just? Because your statements seem to say that war does not bring justice, but if it's defensive, does that come under the banner of justice? So is war therefore just in that regard?
Excellent question. Thank you. My position, my personal position, I have to talk for myself. I cannot talk for everyone evangelical in Ukraine. I think my personal stance is, and I have answered this question numerous times in all kinds of interviews. I myself would not go to fight, but I myself, from the first day one of invasion, was helping to military in every possible way, apart taking a weapon into my hands and go and fight. But I would not exclude that as, there is this Latin phrase, ultima ratio, as the last argument. But I have blessed, as a pastor, many people to take a weapon with this notion that I do not bless them to go and kill. I bless them to go and defend those whom they love, those the most precious to them, their wives, their children's, and our country. Because for us Ukrainians, I think here most of us would agree, evangelical, this is the war of existence. Either we fight and exist, or we stop fighting and we cease to exist. It's as blunt as it can be. So in this situation, I myself, being through many different wars, and being sympathetic to some of the pacifistic stance, because I believe that real pacifism is born out of war, not in some peaceful situation. When you have been part of a conflict where you have seen that it has no meaning in itself, it has only meaning as you have asked, a defense. So in our case, at the moment so far, I'm helping in a rare front where there are so many work to be done without compromising any of my religious convictions. But I would not exclude as a ultima ratio that I can, at some point, if we are to defend to the end, I would not exclude that option that I can take weapon and fight. Is that clear answer, or I should clarify it even more?
I think that's clear.
Thank you.
Fyodor, my name's Jeff. It's nice to meet you virtually.
Nice to meet you too. Yes, nice to meet you too.
Related to the comment that was made by Matt when we started out about the different points of views, and I really appreciated it. Just kind of as you're wrapping up, you were humble and honest enough to say that you have a very particular perspective based on your proximity to war. In our group, I was expressing that I feel like it's far from that demographic as could possibly be. I'm aged over 60. My dad is not a soldier. My grandparents were soldiers. My cousins were soldiers. I've never actively been in war, even if the United States may have been in conflict at some point of war with another country. One of the questions that I have is around, I have an assumption in my head that in my situation, I would be prone to apathy or indifference or ignorance. And I have even a bigger assumption on your side that fatigue or frustration or anger might be emotions that would inhibit sort of living out peacemaking piece of your presentation that you talked about. What are some of your thoughts about, one, do you think that's valid? I'd like to hear your thoughts on whether or not those assumptions are valid about sort of the apathy and ignorance versus fatigue and maybe anger. And what kind of resources or practical things you might point to work against that, or whether it's a practical suggestion, maybe something that existed in your pitch that might address that, or some scripture that might address those things. So are my assumptions accurate, and what things might be used to address that in a practical sense? Do you have any thoughts on it?
I'm sorry, I didn't get exactly. Can you just, in a few words, paraphrase your question? I would appreciate that
Do the
because
best.
there is a kind of sound is not clear. Yeah.
I'll do my best because I'm not very succinct.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Just in a simple words. Yeah. Question, and I will try to answer it.
Two different perspectives on war.
Yes.
Myself, I've never been around war. I'm prone to ignorance and apathy, and that works against me
Yeah.
doing things successfully.
Hmm.
What practical things might we do to combat that? And from your perspective, maybe you're prone to fatigue or anger. What practical
Hmm.
things do you fight against that?
Uh, yes, there is a fatigue. There is a disappointment. There is an anger. There is all kinds of emotions we've been through because of unprovoked and unjust aggression. We've been against us. All possible weapons have been used. And yes, that's why I ended by saying that my perception can be distorted because I've been through all this mess for 903 days, I guess, today, a full-scale invasion, but I've been involved in a war since 2015. I would regularly go to the east Donetsk region, Lugansk region. I would spend time with soldiers. For example, last Christmas I spent in trenches with the soldiers, and it was intentionally so that I could understand what kind of war we are into. Um, so that's my situation. Your situation of ignorance and of knowledge. Well, I think that if we if this whole war story bothers us, disturbs us, and we want to figure out what's going on, then of course we have to talk to people we trust. We have to do our kind of research into what the information is valid, what the information is not valid. In a war situation, it requires very meticulous critical thinking because you are overwhelmed with the information. It's so hard to find out the resources. For example, the Russians would launch, these informational bots that would just produce the information, and there are thousands per day that are producing information that is meant to confuse you. It meant to bewilder you. It meant to mislead you in the way you think. For example, I will just give you how the propaganda works. Few weeks ago, we had a horrible attack on a children's hospital in Kiev. I think you have all heard about it. I was back then in Oxford, but I was so much disturbed because I know that hospital so well. I took my kids there since they were small kids. When I shared it with my daughter was very disturbed by that news. But what then we see? You go to your phone, you have all the access to the news, and what the propaganda does, it throws into the news sphere all sorts of contradictory informations, not to inform you, but to confuse you. And that's how this current war works. So what I would advise you in a practical way is that you have to not just use any information, because all sorts of information is available to you today. And that's why you have to have some kind of moral orientation in this world. That's which will help you to have a kind of criterias to check the information with the sources that you trust. And then you are to decide what to do with this kind of information. I am not the one to tell you that you have to trust me. I am not the one to tell you that I am the one who knows the true situation about everything that is going on. I am certainly not the person to be unbiased in this kind of situation or free of prejudice in this kind of situation. No, I am full of biases, and I have to admit it. So I would love you to take my side, of course, in all this situation. But why you have to take my side? Why you have to trust me without knowing me and hearing me for the first time in your life? And even talking to you, I may talk one thing and leave another thing. That's another big thing, and we know how it works in life. So what I would say is that you have to have some kind of um, principles, values in life, and that's where the church should work on formation of these. Then you have to retreat to the resources you trust, resources that prove to be trustful over the time. And then you still having that information, you have to question how they get this information, whether that information presents you the full scale of what has happened. I'm now just sharing with you how I work with information, because I'm bombed with information on daily basis, and you have to sift it through in order to make kind of your understanding of what's going on. And that's not an easy. I don't have step 1, step 2, step 3 formula that would advise you how you should work it out, because you have to work through your life something. How do you deal with information? Which information you trust, which you don't trust? You remember I said that the first victim of war is truth. It is so hard to find what really is going on at the moment. And because we are biased, that's what the propaganda counts on. It counts that they can, by confusing you, by bewildering you, working and appealing to your biases so that they would form a narration you can trust, you can follow, and you can fight for. In this way, that's why I think the sword in Jesus's words meant this critical thinking. You have to decide on daily basis with whom do you want to affiliate yourself, with whom do you want to be alike, and from whom do you want to distance yourself and say I don't want to do anything. I am a bad example in this case because I'm too biased. I am, and I always admit it, because I was born in a dissident family. All my grandfather was a political prisoner. My father was a politically persecuted person. I have never heard anything good about Russians since my childhood. So I'm too biased, I'm too biased to trust anything that comes from Moscow, because that's what I've been brought up with. And I would not like just to, and I don't like to generalize things either, because generalization is not fact at all. When you generalize, when you say all evangelicals are bad, well, that's not true. All evangelicals are good, either not true. Although when you say a statement, there are good Russians, I would even doubt that, nowadays. Although prior to this full-scale war, I've been to Moscow, to St. Petersburg. We were doing all kinds of good projects, evangelistics, educational projects with Russians. Although my father would always taught me never trust Russians, you know. And only after this full-scale invasion, I start to think, well, maybe my father knew something more than I do, you know. But still, having said all this, I am not the person who likes to shut the door and say that we will never talk, we will never discuss, we will never reconcile, we will never talk about forgiveness and things like that. But when the conflict is on, I think to talk about forgiveness, to talk about reconciliation is to re-traumatize people. It has to be settled, and then we will talk. We have to know how much we are to forgive. At the moment, we don't know. We don't know how many Buchas, Mariupols are there. We don't know how many victims. We don't know how many rapes. We don't know how many killings, how many things have happened. So, and no one asks us for forgiveness, by the way. You know, so I think we will come to that point, but not at the moment.
This is a good segue,
I
I think.
I hope
Go
I
ahead.
did I answer your question, or I just said whatever I want? Okay, thank you.
A little bit of both, maybe, but it was
Yes,
outstanding.
yes. Yes, that's the way we answer questions. We say whatever we want, you know.
We have time for one more question, and I would like to hear if somebody has a well-formulated question on the link between standing for the truth and the conflict that produces. If there's a question about that third question that Fyodor posed to us, I'd like to hear something along those lines. This pushes us to our limits. This pushes us to think about where we stand in relation to the gospel, where the gospel stands in relation to the world. So, does anybody have a question?
I don't know, I have a question I'd really like to ask though.
Yeah,
Again, and then you can do whatever you want. Do I need to go up there? Or can I just take the room?
you in particular have to come to the
With my wife, I live and work in France in a
Yeah.
church, and we have a Russian lady who is a really great friend of ours and has been in our church, come to know the Lord. And so just even from the Western perspective, it's very interesting to try to walk her through. So it's a little, yeah, I'm sorry, it really resonates with what you're saying about justice. So my question is really theoretical. So is there, in your mind, is there a difference between having to be the victim of injustice? Because you said that peacemaking is not about peace, but it's about truth, taking convictions, and then about justice.
Justice,
So
yeah.
is there a difference in your mind between having to be passively, like have to live out injustice and the ethical stance you have to take, and then also between someone who has the ability to do justice, but it would involve bringing violence? Since I'm thinking particularly from a Western context, there's a lot of debate about financing, funding, sending weapons of war to do, to things. And it seems to me, my question is, I think there's a difference, but I want to know if you think there's a difference, and how would you navigate that question between being a victim of injustice and then having your moral view, having to live with that. But on our side, other people's point of view, doing justice might involve bringing about war and violence and death. And yeah, so anyways, is that a clear question?
Yes. So let me repeat your question. So me as a victim of injustice, how can I do the justice? Am I right? In
No,
this
it's
kind of
just
situation?
in a Christian ethics decision-making process. You've come to your understanding and view of what it means to be, what is pacifism and justice, and you're living out in your context.
Mm-hmm.
But in another context where people have the ability to be decision makers on doing, basically bringing justice to a war zone or situation, but that would entail the use of violence or furthering violent actions through supplying arms, money, weapons, advisors, things like that. do you think that the ethical concerns and thought process are the same, or are they different because of the person's relationship to being able to do justice and having to basically live, not having any recourse to justice, but being unjustly treated?
Yeah. Well, let me answer your question with a story. Last few weeks, I've been to Denmark. I was invited as a speaker to summer camps in Denmark, and a young man with whom we met thanks to podcasts. You know, he listened to my podcast with Miroslav Wolf, and then he contacted me and he says, I will be in Ukraine. Can we meet? So I said, what are you going to do in Ukraine? He says, I'm bringing military cars to your army. So we met. And this time when I was in Denmark, he approached me and he says, you know, I'm helping to your Ministry of Defense to update or to improve or to make your drones even more sophisticated, even more capable of killing more Russians. And I have an ethical dilemma with it. Should I help you with that? Because I know what the results of my work will be. And I said to him, well, why do you do this? What motivates you to do this? You can sit in Denmark and, you know, and enjoy your life in a country which tends to kind of, you know, be the country where the most happy people in the world lives. And why to be bothered with the war in Ukraine? He says, well, because it's unjust. This war is unjust war. And I said, well, but does that fact of unjust war justifies your help of improving our drones to kill more Russians? So that's the kind of questions you have asked me, you know, because I think, well, sorry for saying what I will say. I think that we are so eclectical in ethical thinking. So we can always build our ethical argument in a way to justify to do whatever we think we should do because we think we are fighting injustice, well, with a dubiously just means or dubiously just way. So that's why I said that there is, for the prophets, there is no peace without justice. And for me, that's a kind of too basic orientation, because the whole biblical narrative is that justice is done when the most powerful use their power not to exploit, not to subjugate, not to manipulate with the weak people, but to serve them and to help them to become stronger. Well, in our war situation, why this war for me is unjust? Because a sick person, sorry for being blunt, with a power and weapon at hand, decided to destroy the whole nation just because he doesn't like us. That's that's to my previous question. That's very biased, but that's how I think. And that's how I view this war. I think that Putin is a psycho. Because why? Why I have this? Why I allowed myself to say that? Because for all his 25 years of being a president, that's all he did. If you analyze all his 25 years, he would invade, he would kill, he would destroy not just Ukrainians, Syrians, Georgians, Moldovians, but Russians people as well. Leadership is also an ethical issue. I believe that Bible calls us the leaders to get the best out of the people, to lead them in being a best version of ourselves, to help them to grow to be a better version of ourselves. But there is a flip side to the leadership. When there are bad leaders are trying to awake the worst in the people. And that is exactly what Putin is leadership all about. All his years in being president, he was evoking the worst version of people, in Russian people. So it's not about that the Russians are bad, but if you have a leader who evokes in you the worst version of you and justifies that. For example, and now, of course that's a propaganda. But when Ukrainians a week ago invaded Russian territories, why there is no, even Russian propaganda has no sources to prove that we create a Bucha in some of the villages, that we create a Mariupol, that we create a torture room, that we would looted houses there. No, because that's the difference. Not because Ukrainians are better people, but because our leadership in defending our country was not appealing to the lowest in us, to the most sinful things in us. But we were called to defend, we were called to stand for the right to be ourselves in the face of invasion. So when we are trying ethically to draw a clear line, how do I fight injustice by only just means? That's a very tough question. Let me answer with a biblical parable. There is a parable about wheat and, how do you call in English? Wheat and...
Yeah.
Yes, wheat and tares. Thank you. You remember what the slaves of the owner said? Let us go and we will pull out all the tares. And that's what we are Christians in the times of war are very succumbed to do, or very what is the word, English word? It's tempted to do, is that we are trying to fight the evil by the same means as the evil fights us. Our calling is to be wheat. And what does it mean to be a wheat in the world of tares? That is a big challenge. That is a big ethical challenge for Christians today. I believe that we are to confront the inhumanness in other human being without losing our humanity. And that is a big, big moral challenge and ethical challenge for me. And that is something I faced on daily basis. And sorry, I don't have a formula that would be acceptable to you and that you would follow it in every moral challenge that you will face. And that's how it is. That's the life. I have to face that challenge, and I hope that I will have enough strength in every situation I have to make that challenge to remain just, using the just means, confronting the injustice. But I cannot assure you in that. I can only strive for that. Hopefully that I will manage that.
Fyodor, I would happily give up lunch and everything else in this day to keep talking with you.
Yes. I wish you good appetite, bon appetit.
Um,
And
I
Yeah,
would say,
I'm sorry that I didn't answer your questions, but that was not my
well, here's
assignment.
say, Fyodor, you said in
Yeah,
your talk, we don't have the right, we don't have the ability to choose the time that we are born into.
yeah, yeah.
We take the circumstances that we're born
We just
into.
have to live with dignity, yes. In times we are, yeah.
And I am profoundly grateful for the fact that I was born in the same time as you.
Oh,
And then,
oh, thank you.
Instead of staying in the United States, that I was sent to Europe, that I pursued a degree at the same university that you are pursuing it at, that the Lord has brought our paths together. And I believe that we will share enough meals to call one another friends someday. Until that day, you are my brother, and I am honored to share this road with you. So
Yeah,
go with
until that day, Matt gets some salt and we will eat together.
we pray for you before we go.